Attention to all brokers and carriers. As of January 16, 2026, the official deadline has been reached for the implementation of the broker and freight forwarder responsibility rule. As a result of this regulatory deadline, the transportation industry has now been formally shut down. This shutdown is effective immediately. All transportation operations are suspended until further notice.
After a 4.5-year legal war, California's trucking industry just surrendered. 70,000 independent truckers are being driven out overnight. The biggest carriers aren't just warning drivers to steer clear. Companies like Landstar are telling them to move out of California, and this is just the beginning. What kind of law is so drastic that it empties highways and cripples America's busiest ports? The answer, and its staggering consequences, start now. Dispatch centers across California lit up with urgent calls and emails. Within days of the legal defeat, carrier offices scrambled to respond. Landstar, a national heavyweight in the freight world, sent out advisories to its network. The message was blunt. California's new reality meant risk, potential audits, fines, and retroactive penalties. Drivers who once counted on steady loads from the Golden State now faced a stark choice. Conversations shifted from finding the next shipment to weighing whether to keep working in California at all. Other carriers followed suit, some quietly pulling California loads off their boards. Others warning drivers to avoid picking up freight that originated in the state. Owner-operators, many of whom invested their life savings in trucks and permits, found their phones silent where there used to be a steady buzz of offers. One driver described the sudden change as like someone flipped a switch. One week I'm hauling produce out of the Central Valley, the next week, nothing. The industry wasn't waiting for the first enforcement letter to arrive. Instead, risk managers and dispatchers made the calculation, better to lose California's business now than face years of back pay or a six-figure penalty later. The legal battle ended not in a courtroom, but in the day-to-day decisions of companies and drivers who no longer saw a future on California's roads. California's Assembly Bill 5, signed into law in September 2019, rests on a deceptively simple framework, the ABC test. This test determines whether a worker is classified as an independent contractor or an employee. To remain independent, a worker must meet all three prongs. The first prong, freedom from company control, often fits how owner-operators run their businesses. The third prong, operating an established trade, also fits, since most truckers invest heavily in their rigs and run their own operations. But the second prong, known as the B prong, is where the law draws a hard line. The B prong says the work performed must be outside the usual course of the hiring company's business. For truckers leased to motor carriers, this is an impossible hurdle. Hauling freight is the core business of every carrier. Under Labor Code Section 2775, the moment an owner-operator moves a load for a trucking company, the law presumes that driver is an employee, not an independent contractor. There is no carve-out, no room for negotiation, just automatic reclassification. Other professions, from doctors to engineers, received exemptions written directly into the statute. Truckers did not. For the state's 70,000 owner-operators, the B prong functions less like a guideline and more like a locked door. The independence they built over decades is erased by a single clause, leaving business owners with a stark new reality: adapt to employment or step aside. Every number in the trucking world represents a person who took a gamble on themselves. In California, nearly 70,000 owner-operators built their livelihoods around independence. Some drive rigs worth $150,000 or more, often financed through years of savings or family loans. These are not gig workers picking up shifts. They are small business owners who shoulder every cost, from insurance to engine rebuilds, and who bet on their ability to keep wheels turning. Assembly Bill 5 does not just threaten a job, it wipes out entire businesses overnight. For carriers, converting independent drivers to employees is not as simple as changing a contract. It means absorbing payroll taxes, health insurance, workers' compensation, and paid leave, while also covering the maintenance and fuel costs those drivers use to handle themselves. For a single truck, the added payroll burden can run tens of thousands of dollars each year. Multiply that by dozens or hundreds of drivers, and the math simply does not work for most small and mid-sized fleets. Many owner-operators see no path forward. They cannot become employees without walking away from the businesses they spent years building. Facing the loss of control over their schedules, routes, and income, most are left with a bitter choice: give up independence or abandon California altogether. The law does not just change how trucking is done. It erases the foundation of 70,000 small businesses in one stroke. January arrives, and with it, a quiet wave of closures sweeps across California's back roads and highways. At the heart of it is Senate Bill 445, a law that requires every gas station in the state to upgrade its underground storage tanks, a process that can cost up to $2 million per site. The state's Rust program, once billed as a lifeline for small operators, stalls under a mountain of paperwork and empty promises. For hundreds of station owners, the wait stretches for years, but the fines for non-compliance do not. Each day past the deadline, the state assesses penalties of $15,000 to $20,000. The math is simple and brutal. Faced with impossible costs and no real help, 473 gas stations closed their doors for good on January 1st. The impact lands hardest in rural communities. Family-run stations that once served as the only fuel stop for 20 or 30 miles vanish overnight, leaving long stretches of highway with nothing but locked pumps and faded signs. Trucks that remain on the road now face a new kind of risk. Not just the threat of lost business, but the real possibility of running dry in the middle of nowhere. For many drivers, the fuel desert is no longer a distant worry. It is the new reality, written in the silence of shuttered stations and the growing miles between open pumps. Phillips 66, a cornerstone of California's fuel supply for more than a century, shuttered its Los Angeles refinery in October 2025. That single closure eliminated 139,000 barrels per day of refining capacity, roughly 8% of the entire state's output. 6 months later, Valero's Benicia facility is preparing to wind down operations as well, taking another 145,000 barrels per day offline by April 2026. Together, these two exits erase more than 17% of California's total refining power in less than a year. Refineries are not just industrial landmarks, they are the backbone of the state's diesel and gasoline supply. When a plant this size goes dark, the ripple reaches far beyond the fence line. Fuel distributors scramble to find alternative sources, trucking companies face tighter margins, and local economies brace for layoffs. Workers who spent decades inside these gates now confront uncertain futures, while communities lose both jobs and tax revenue. The loss of nearly 300,000 barrels a day means less diesel for the trucks that keep California's ports and highways moving. As capacity shrinks, the risk of bottlenecks grows. With each refinery closure, the margin for error in California's fuel supply narrows, setting up a scenario where even minor disruptions could send prices soaring or leave trucks waiting for fuel that simply is not there. At the heart of California's freight economy, the twin ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach stand as the country's busiest gateways, handling close to 40% of all shipping containers entering the United States. With a combined annual capacity of over 10 million 20-foot equivalent units, these ports depend on a constant flow of trucks to move goods from dockside cranes to warehouses and rail yards across the region. But as owner-operators weigh the risks of operating under Assembly Bill 5 and hundreds of fuel stops shutter, the gears that once kept cargo moving begin to grind. Freight forwarders and port supervisors are already tracking signs of shift. Containers stack higher in terminal yards as fewer trucks arrive to haul them away. Shipping companies, wary of delays and escalating costs, quietly shift contracts to ports in Texas and on the East Coast. Logistics managers describe a stark new calculus: pay higher rates for the trucks that remain, or reroute goods entirely to avoid California's bottlenecks. The impact ripples outward. Emergency responders in rural counties now drive up to 30 miles just to refuel, stretching response times for fires and medical calls. Corporate supply chain strategists are warning clients about unpredictable delivery schedules and surging freight costs. The state's dominance as a logistics hub no longer feels certain. As trucking capacity shrinks and fuel grows scarce, California's ports, once a symbol of unstoppable trade, face a mounting backlog that no amount of innovation can clear. The perfect storm is not a theory anymore. It is playing out in real time, container by container, mile by mile. California now risks paralyzing the very supply chain that moves 40% of America's imports. As trucks and fuel disappear together, shortages and delays become the new normal. When policy outpaces reality, the consequences do not wait. The true cost of these choices is only just beginning to surface.